disobey him. That is, that there are consequences when we do not walk with God. And part of those consequences is not only dealing with his sternness or severity, but also with his judgment. For when we look at the Greek word for sternness, it means to cut off and to remove from. So when there's disobedience in our lives, we are cutting ourselves off from the kindness of God and ushering in the severity of God. For we have removed ourselves from him by our disobedience. If you were to break down the Greek word for sternness, further, diving into it, which I will not share with you how deep the rabbit hole goes, but you will eventually come to the realization of just how cut off you really are. The word signifies the now, the immediate, the instant separation from God. This is the sternness and severity of God. And we see this in Isaiah 42, 24 through 25. God said, who handed Jacob over to become loot and Israel to the plunders. Was it not the Lord, against whom we have sinned? For they will not follow his ways. They did not obey his laws. So he poured out on them his burning anger, the violence of war. It enveloped them in flames, yet they did not understand. It consumed them, but they did not take it to heart. Or as the prophet Jeremiah says in 18, 9 through 10, and if at another time I announce that a nation or kingdom is to be built up and planted, and if it does evil in my sight and does not obey me, then I will consider the good I had intended to do for it. This means to experience the sternness of God is to understand the consequences of when we are disobedient to him. We recognize why we suffer judgment, that is the being cut off and removed from God. And this is why Paul uses the metaphor of being grafted onto the olive tree here in Romans 11, 22 through 25. He says when we are walking with God, we are grafted into the olive tree. We benefit from being connected to the source of love, joy, peace, patience, and kindness. But when we are not walking with God, when we are being disobedient to him, we will face the sternness and severity of God, which means we will not be able to benefit from being connected to the tree. Rather, we will be cut off, or as Jesus says in the parable of the vine in John 15:6, if you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. And so to understand the kindness of God, you have to look at what happens when you are not walking in obedience with God. To have the fruit of kindness is to live our lives as we walk with the Spirit, so that we may not experience the sternness of God, which sets us up for the complete separation from him. The immediate separation, the immediate removal from God. So to experience the fruit of kindness in our lives, we must be willing to be obedient to God's commands. And we must be willing to follow his word. And when we do that, we are grounded in him, which leads us to experience the kindness of God. And in order to have the fruit of kindness in our lives, we must find the source of kindness, which has been poured out for us for our benefit. As Paul says in Romans 11, verses 22 through 24, must remain connected and grafted to the olive tree. And that tree, it comes and the tree that Paul is mentioning is God. It is by remaining connected to him that we are able to have the fruit of kindness in our lives. If the sternness of God is a result of our disobedience, that the kindness of God results from our obedience to remain in Him and walking with Him. And this is why Paul mentions in Galatians 5:22-23 to walk with the Spirit, to constantly be by the side of God as you are walking with Him in your life. For when we are walking with the Spirit in obedience with God, we are remaining in Him. The commandments of God hold sway over our lives, and we are able to experience the kindness of God. Just as Paul says in Galatians 5:16, so walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. So we ask ourselves, what is the kindness of God? The kindness of God is the mercy and forgiving grace of God, which has been given to us because we have repented and turned our backs on the desires of the flesh, which is the sinful nature of our body. Kindness has been offered, and which we have experienced when we walk with the Lord. This is the kindness of God. That the kindness of God is in relation to the grace of God. His grace which He has shown to us because of His kindness towards us. For we no longer live or have to experience the sternness or severity of His punishment, but God's kindness on us has been demonstrated by His grace being given to us, so we may know how kind God is. And this is why Paul says of God, and this is why Paul says this of God's great love in Ephesians 2:4-5. He says, because of God's great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in our transgressions. It is by grace that you have been saved. And the source of kindness of God, in which we are all to believe and have received, comes from the grace of God, His kindness towards us. As Paul writes to Titus in chapter 2, verse 11-12, for the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age. For the Lord does not want us to be that authoritative figure all the time of our faith, but rather God wants to be the loving, kind Father to us all. He wants to demonstrate His willingness to be by our side, His willingness to forgive our transgressions, His willingness to be kind to us when we need it the most. Just as the prophet Isaiah said in Isaiah 30:18, yet the Lord longs to be gracious to you. Therefore He will rise up to show you compassion. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all who wait for Him. To be rooted in kindness of God is to be obedient to God. And when we are obedient to God, we experience His amazing grace that He has for us. As it is written in